Hello, everyone. Welcome to an episode of Tekken Tips Sundays on a Saturday. For this episode, we're going to try and go a bit shorter, but hopefully tackle a really important bit of advice. So, what that advice is relates to knowledge checks. And I'm sure we're all familiar with what knowledge checks are. I actually know players whose entire play style is essentially, and the entire mindset about the game is Tekken is a series of knowledge checks, which is a very interesting way of framing Tekken, and they create very successful game plans around it. But I think for most people, knowledge checks aren't quite at the level of that person's thinking of them. They're more of like, strings, frame data, frame traps. And we'll leave it at that, right? There's other knowledge checks about, spacing, there's other knowledge checks about mind games. But let's just leave it at strings, frame data, and frame traps, right? And there's a certain amount of risk reward regarding just initiating that knowledge check or just using that knowledge check. So let's do a concrete example right off the bat. What is the safest, easiest risk reward knowledge check situation in the game, probably? Well, it's Electric Wind Godfist at the wall. Let's say we're using Devil Jin. Electric Wind Godfist at the wall, forward, forward two, right? Or Electric Wind Godfist at the wall, down, forward one. And essentially, what this is doing is does this person, first of all, know the plus frames of Electric Wind Godfist, period? Do they know that at the wall it doesn't have the same pushback? Do they know um, not to just straight up duck on the first encounter? And do they know not to press based on, this frame trap? And so this is a very standard situation that I think when you play against every Devil Jin player, this will happen to you. And if not forward forward two, definitely down forward one or some even faster mid check. And the risk reward on this is so small because if they fail this knowledge check, and let's say they duck or try and press a slow button, you're getting a counter hit wall splat into one of the highest wall damage enders in the game. And if they pass the knowledge check, you're safe. And you still have wall positioning. And you're going to remember that and apply mix ups in the future, right? So that is probably the best risk reward, quote unquote, knowledge check, or it's a frame check in the game, right? Now let's switch over to something a bit more risky, a bit more high risk, high reward, and this is going to be geese, right? So we all know the geese quarter circle back two kind of ender, where it's a high into either a knockdown mid or a knockdown low. And this quarter circle back two series comes out of a lot of Geese's strings, right? And when it's in those strings, it's very easily duckable and launchable. And when I say very easily, I mean training mode very easily. So in training mode, you can do it every single time. In a match, you should be able to do it every single time, but it's to the point where there's a little bit of error, that's going to happen, right? It's not quite like a snake edge. It's something you should do every time, but the occasional slip happens, right? That is a little higher risk, still high reward. But why is it higher risk? Because if your opponent passes this string check of a high, you're getting launched, right? If they pass a string check of a high, they're getting launched. If they fail the knowledge check of this high, you get an insane mix up in max mode. An insane mix up in max mode that you can get to from very fast strings, right? And so Geese players will still often test this because again, it's just so good if, it doesn't work out, but it is kind of high risk. And so lastly, let's go to an example of a knowledge check that is very high risk, low reward, right? We're going to go back to Law because, you know, Law is who I play, so good example. Law is high risk, low reward. knowledge check is his power crush, his forward forward three. And I know what you might be saying, but low reward, if that connects, I mean, that's just absurd damage. Well, yeah, that's true if it connects, but it's so slow. It's one of the slowest armor moves in the game in terms of both when the armor comes out, how much time the person has to hit you during the armor, and it's launch punishable. So the probability of it hitting a opponent who is both near your level in skill and who understands what's going on in the match is very, very slim. It's almost, I mean, it's so slim, right? You're throwing out a 20 plus frame move that's seeable, essentially. And it has so much armor time that they can get like 10 jabs in and still block it, right? And so I would categorize that as high risk, low reward. And the only time you would, as a law player, really initiate that knowledge check is if, based on other knowledge checks, you've decided this person doesn't really know frame data, right? And you're confident that they're not going to launch punish this move. So these are kind of how you can think about whether or not to even use knowledge checks. And in the tournament setting, it becomes even more important, right? So one last law example, down 2-3, of course, counter hit 11 frame high crushing special mid launcher, minus 15 on block. In tournament, I almost 100% will use this move, maybe the first round, or definitely the first game. Because if I get launched, okay, maybe I gave up an entire round. Maybe I gave up an entire round for that knowledge check. But the reward, if they fail that knowledge check, and no, a fail doesn't mean no punish, right? A fail could mean they do a 12 frame punish. If they fail that knowledge check, I almost won the set. It's not guaranteed or anything, but I've just been given like one of the best moves in the game, right? If down 2-3 is minus 12, it's absurd. It's an absurd move. It's only not absurd, and it's only just a decent panic move if it's launch punishable. And so I just encourage you to kind of think about, okay, what are my knowledge checks? What are my go-to knowledge checks that are low risk, high reward, or high risk, high reward? And what situations do I want to use them? Against what kind of opponents do I want to use them? Like, and don't be afraid, even if you're playing a very good player, to throw out knowledge checks, right? Even if you're playing the best players, knowledge checks can act as a mindset check, even. Just like how focused, how zoned in are they on the current match, right? Even if you know that they know it, it's just, well, are they actually in the match to the point where they're gonna deal with it? Right? I mean, Nina's can opener is a classic example. I mean, that should be burned into your soul to low parry that. But if you're not really paying attention, if you're too tired that day in a tournament, if you've had too much caffeine and your mind's going crazy, you might miss it, right? So think about the risk reward of those uh, knowledge checks, and don't just autopilot knowledge checks. In other words, don't just go in and be like, I need to check all the boxes, because checking all the boxes is good, but do so in a very controlled manner where you're going to get the most information out of it, and the most influence on the match's outcome out of it. So anyway, that's pretty much it. Thank you very much for listening. At me on Twitter if you have any questions. The link is in, or name is in the description. Thank you very much.